Because guess what? People who are crazy enough, they can take risks that other people can't. And there is a kind of cool that comes from that. What I usually do in this type of moment is I'll do different things. Sometimes I'll go to the bar and have a drink. It's probably the drunken Irish gene in me, but I don't do that to any extreme. I don't really like getting drunk. And I know that I have this kind of Irish tendency to alcoholism, so that is another reason why I kind of avoid drinking in excess, although I definitely have a taste for it. More often, honestly, I'll just smoke some weed and try to watch something interesting. I'll just try to find something that actually stimulates me and intrigues me. In fact, today what I did actually was smoked some weed and watched this documentary on YouTube about Lil Peep. It's not like the greatest documentary in the world, but it's also not bad either for a YouTube documentary. The kid who made it clearly put a lot of work into it, and it actually does a really good job of, this is my favorite thing about this documentary, it collects some of his kind of interview snippets and writings and comments, and really does actually paint a pretty interesting, somewhat deep psychological portrait. So shout out to that guy. It's not hard to find on YouTube. And so I watched that with interest, actually. It actually got me writing about some things. I think these SoundCloud rapper kids are way more interesting and important than people realize. Or rather, how should I put that? It's easy to laugh at them. It's easy to kind of just think it's a bunch of crazy kids and it's all a joke. But it's actually quite profound, I think, what a lot of these kids do. It's much more honorable and admirable than people realize. Like, think about it. I mean, what does it take for a 16-year-old kid or a 17-year-old kid to get big face tattoos and drop out of high school and just start uploading music like crazy to SoundCloud? You know, I mean, that's, in a way, it's impressive, and there's something deeper going on there. People just don't really understand, I think, the social psychology of things like tattooing. Like tattooing, for instance, especially big, aggressive face tattoos. It's actually pretty interesting if you think about it. And what these kids are really doing, and there's even some anecdotal evidence for this, like in this documentary about Lil Peep. I think face tattoos do two things. One is, in game theory, there's this idea of tying one's hands, or in the rational choice literature on why states go to war, there's this idea of tying one's own hands. If you can credibly commit to be unable to do certain things, if you're credibly closing off certain paths, then it changes how you're perceived. It changes what type of person people think you are, and it also changes for yourself what you are allowed to let yourself think about, in other words. And there's this part in the documentary where Lil Peep is pretty much like, I paraphrase, but it's something to the effect of, he says, yeah, I decided to get face tattoos because I had to make something happen, and I wasn't going to be able to do anything else. So yeah, it's a kind of tying one's own hands. And it's also signaling, obviously. It's a kind of low conscientiousness signaling. I think it's what you would call a kind of fast life history. It's a different type of strategy than what, patient, conscientious, careerist intellectuals and journalists do. And that's why so few people are able to understand it. Because all the people who write and speak in public, for a public audience intellectually, they don't have any contact with or experience with or familiarity with the fast life strategy. That is a very real strategy. And pretty much it's like, if you feel like you don't have long-term prospects, or for whatever reason, perhaps you don't have the resources, perhaps you feel, or on some level that you're psychologically incapable of it or disinclined, then you can try to achieve success and survival, in other words, in a kind of evolutionary sense, through essentially being crazy in certain ways. It's a legitimate tactic or strategy for succeeding, for accumulating resources. Because guess what? People who are crazy enough can do things, they can take risks that other people can't if people are playing it safer. And there is a kind of cool that comes from that, and a hard-earned cool. It's, if you think about like the badass teenage boy in the hunter-gatherer tribe, right, who's like willing to go get that lion all by himself. He's a badass, right? It makes people like him. It's valuable, it's cool, and it's admirable. And so, yeah, if you don't feel like you can, go down the traditional prestige route in life and slowly build some sort of institutional career in some kind of proper channel, then you can choose the strategy of essentially sabotaging that entire path and doing crazy things that show your craziness, essentially. That attracts attention and it attracts resources. And so that's what these kids are doing. And it's easy to look down on that, but that's only because you're doing it from the perspective of kind of modern capitalist institutionalized perch that you might be in. There are people who can't play that game, who don't want to play that game, who hate that. And that's why I think ultimately these SoundCloud rapper kids are really kind of cool in their bravado. And I think like face tattoos are, of course they make a kind of bourgeois person scream, but I think they're admirable. I think it's powerful. I'm not about to get any, don't worry, but I get it. And I think when you get it, you have to kind of tip your hat to what they're doing. I mean, I don't have the balls to do it. You don't have the balls to do it for the most part. And I don't think any highbrow intellectuals or academics or journalists really understand the gravitas of that kind of game, the difficulty that these young kids are subjecting themselves to in life and in social life for the rest of their life. It's pretty phenomenal. And ultimately, it's a kind of commitment to art is really what it is, because these kids are looking out at the institutional world ahead of them, and they're saying to themselves, fuck no, there's no way I'm doing that. I know that I can do something better. I can have more creative, fulfilling life somehow. And maybe I'm 16 and I don't even know how, but I sure as hell know I'm never going to do that career game, either because I don't want to, or because I hate it, or because I'm not good at it, and I don't have the skills or traits required, whatever the explanation might be, or because they're poor and they're born into very low prospect kind of life, whatever the case might be, they see that and they're like, I'm going to be a fucking artist. I'm going to find some way to be creative and I'll fucking do anything because I'm not going into that institutional machinery. And I have a lot of respect for that. I really do. And it's much more psychologically taxing and impressive, really, than people give it credit for. It's what Foucault called an ascesis, a kind of a practice of self-cultivation, a kind of exercise on the self. You're really exercising certain psychological muscles when you do something like get face tattoos. It's an extreme form of ascesis, or practice on the self. And it's no joke, man. It's no joke. This is why I'm really interested in SoundCloud rappers lately, and why I'm talking a lot about them. People think I'm just joking, and there are some things that are funny about it. Like, I think it's funny to kind of act like one, or like that whole thing is obviously a joke. But at the heart of things is a real appreciation and admiration that I have for these young, ambitious kids who are really committing to a life of rebellious, antisocial, kind of anti-institutional creativity and freedom.